Dabbling with spirituality means dabbling with your life. Curiosity is what gets you and others hurt. In order to tap in with the energies from the other side, you need to understand spirituality first. In this episode, pay close attention to what happens when you have no idea what you're doing, but dive in head first into the mouth of hell. Be sure to subscribe and like for more haunting stories like this that will keep you up all night. Eclipse of the Haunted Soul. The addiction is real. Every working hour, George dabbled with something he could not recover from. The voices in his head were possessing his mind and controlling his thoughts, but he could not get away from the paranormal. The obsession grew, and so did the darkness. George grew up on a farm in Texas with his family. His father is a retired fisherman, and his mother quit her teaching job a year ago to take care of the farm full-time with her husband Jim. George's older brother Bobby, 23, moved back home from college 3 months ago. School was just not for him. He wants to open a small business breeding tropical fish. Bobby, his father, and mother Lana love nature and the outdoors. Lana and Jim have been taking their 2 boys camping, hiking, and fishing since the boys were in diapers. But George was adventurous in his own way. His curiosity for the paranormal grew more when he turned 18. Most kids go to the library to get books and do research on school assignments. Not George. He had been collecting books on ghosts, hauntings, demons, how spirituality works, and how to open portals to communicate with the dead. On George's 18th birthday earlier this year, he bought himself a handful of ghost hunting gear, along with paranormal books, spiritual rocks and crystals, and candles. He wanted to dive in deeper, communicating with any spirit that would communicate back without knowing the risks and boundaries. George's interest in the supernatural was just the beginning for his troubles. It was a beautiful, warm day in the spring of April. Jim decided to take his family out on an adventure. He wanted to go fishing on his boat, but Lana and Bobby wanted to go hiking. George voted to go hiking too, so he can try out his ghost hunting tools. Remembering articles he had read about the caves and caverns in the Texas hills made him more anxious to grab his gear and run out the door. Jim could not drive fast enough to get to the caves, according to George. Sitting in the back seat of his father's truck, George unzipped his backpack and was making sure that all his ghost hunting equipment had new batteries in it and they would work. He can hardly contain the excitement of what spiritual contact he would have with the dead. With a smile on his face, George grabbed his front right pocket, where he put his crystals in, and rolled down his window. With the wind blowing in his face, he closed his eyes and enjoyed the rest of the drive to his destiny. After an hour and a half of anticipation, Jim finally turned onto Ranch Road and parked his truck. As the family of 4 started hiking up the trails, they noticed there were no signs of the area anywhere. After an hour of walking, Lana realized that her and her family are lost in the trails. With no sense of direction in an unfamiliar area, George spotted a cave. He convinced Bobby and their parents to go exploring inside. The plan was to find an exit at the other end of the cave, and it would lead them back to their truck. But what they do not know is entering the cave can lead them to danger. Even though the cave was not really that big, it has multiple entrances and exits. This gave George an idea of how to ditch his family for a while so he can practice spiritual rituals he had been reading about. Jim and Lana produced a plan of their own. They were going to split up in 2 groups, and whoever finds the exit first can call the others on their cell phones and lead them to their vehicle. George was relieved they were thinking the same thing, but there was one problem. George wanted to go exploring alone without the company of his brother. He had another idea. George bet Bobby that he could find the right exit sooner than him and challenged him to this competition. Both shook on the bet and they went their separate ways. Lana and Jim were enjoying alone time together. They were holding hands and making it a romantic walk. They are confident that one of the exits will get them out and on the right trail to their truck. Bobby was nervous but did not want to show his younger brother any hesitation. He wanted to prove to himself that he could be a hero and save his family. The cave itself had many surprises, one that contained dark secrets. Though it has multiple exits, there is no escape for what is hidden in the walls. Some might wonder why there are no signs that lead them to the mouth of the entrance of hell. While anxious to stop and pull out his ghost investigation toys out of his backpack, George wanted to gain some distance from himself and his family. After about a couple of minutes of walking, the echoes of his family's voices and footsteps began to get quieter and further away until he could no longer hear them. Right when George was about to get comfortable and set up his ritual gadgets, he started to hear water sounds. Once again, curiosity got the best of him and he went to check it out. What George did not know was that the lake of water he was about to stumble upon had been tainted with dark energies and his life was going to change for all eternity. Lana looked at her phone screen and told Jim that they had an hour left to find the right exit and get back to their vehicle before the sun started setting. With a worried look on her face, Jim took Lana's hand into his and reassured her that they would make it back in time to their truck before it got dark. "I trust you," Lana said with a smile, and they continued to walk. As Bobby went from one exit to another, panic started setting in. He was beginning to think he was in a never-ending maze. He felt as if the walls were closing in on him and that he was never going to get out. Bobby could not bear the thought of not being able to get his family out of this trap he felt they were in. "Snap out of it," Bobby told himself. "I'm going to find that exit and get my family's safety out of this place." With darkness quickly approaching, Bobby ran towards the sixth exit he found. Right when he thought it was the wrong exit again, Bobby began to hear his mother's voice on the other end, calling out to her sons. It was then that Bobby felt relief and ran towards Lana's voice. The happy reunion was cut short when all three of them noticed that George was still missing. Jim looked up into the sky and knew they were running out of daylight fast. Back deep inside the cave, George could not believe his luck. He was staring at a waterfall at the other end of a lake. For a moment, he thought his eyes were playing a trick on him, but quickly came to realize that this was the spot where he wanted to do his spiritual rituals. George was not able to resist the active energies the water was creating. He reached into his backpack and quickly took out a candle and lit it. This was just the beginning of the waves the lake would make. Jim, Lana, and Bobby knew they needed to call out to George and find him now. The sun was quickly sinking. Lana reached into her pocket and pulled out her cell phone. She dialed George's number and put the phone to her ear. Little did she know there was no cell phone towers nearby and the phone call would never go through. This was a bad sign. None of their phones have service. Worry began to sink into them as they were trying to figure out how to find George. Should they hike to their vehicle and find help from the authorities, or should they go back to the maze of the cave to look for George? One thing they agreed on was not to split up again. As the day turned into night, George completely lost track of time. Sitting next to the lake he stumbled upon, the air began to thicken within the walls. Darkness quickly surrounded George, and the only light he could see was from the candle he lit. The spiritual crystals that were once in his pocket were now scattered on the floor around him. George turned on the spirit box in hopes he would communicate with the dead, hoping one can give him direct answers from beyond. Bobby is determined to find his brother, but is hesitant to go back inside the cave. An eerie feeling came over him as he realized the cave may be cursed. You can easily get lost in it. Jim is desperately trying to find a phone signal to call George, and Lana is screaming out to him from the mouth of the cave, but the only responses she hears are the echoes of her own voice. George is hypnotized by the sounds coming from all around him. It's not the spirit box he's hearing, but they are talking directly to him. He closes his eyes as he feels energy wrapping around him. The walls are coming to life and the steady lake is forming ripples. A gust of wind rushes through George as he is frozen stiff and cannot move. Heavy footsteps are rapidly getting closer and closer as the air thickens and the candle blows out. George is paralyzed and consumed by darkness. Once a peaceful feeling turns into fear and dread. The evil presence has been awakened and he no longer feels like he's alone. He cannot talk, move, or run. George's thoughts are filled with memories of sadness and death. His emotions are raging inside as a single tear rolls down his face. This is not what he wanted. This is not what his expectations were when he opened the portals to the other side. Suddenly, George hears a familiar voice calling out his name. It's Lana, looking for her son. Then, everything stops. Silence once again surrounds George. He tries to stand up and run out, but something heavy has pinned him down. There is nothing more he wants but to join his family and leave. Not knowing what to do, George closed his eyes and tried to hear his mother's voice again. Pitch black and not being able to see anything around him, George did not know what to do. The walls were coming to life again, and George could no longer see the entrance of where he came from. At the mouth of the cave, Bobby and his parents finally decided to go inside after an hour of no sign of George. Using only the flashlight of their cell phones, the three of them go inside. The environment at night is vastly different in the cave than it was a couple hours ago when the sun was still up. The three walked in the cave for hours looking for George. They are tired and frustrated. How did this happen? Where is George? Lana asked. Bobby thought that George had gone out from a different exit and he was not in the cave anymore. So he led his parents to the other 5 exits he had been to earlier. But there were no other exits. There was only one they went out from and came back in. Confused and angry, Jim was now leading his family. George! George! The family called out over and over again. They would have seen George passing by them if he had been walking out, Bobby thought. Then, as they were about to turn around and walk out again, they heard sounds of water. The three quickly started walking towards it. They discovered the waterfall, the lake, and George's belongings, but no sign of George. Lana called out to George once more. They heard a faint cry coming from within the walls, but George was nowhere to be found.